Good evening and welcome. We are very delighted to be here tonight once again with our partners at Hearst Media and the Dylan Schneider Group to present another evening of Civility. But since I see a couple new faces here and some old friends as well, I can't pass up this opportunity and tell you right now, save April 19th for a novel affair. It's our annual gala. We're honoring Gail Malloy this year, and it's going to be a fantastic time. So set that date aside. There's information and details on our website, and it's one big party, and it's right here held at the library, so you will enjoy it immensely. With that, I'm going to stop the commercials and hand it over to Joe Pisani from the Dylan Schneider Group.
Thank you, Alice, for all that you do. The library's been absolutely fantastic. We have an enormously special program for you tonight. A local boy, as they say, from Old Greenwich, grew up in Westport, and one of the most illustrious figures in journalism in America today. Mike Perlis is the CEO and executive chairman of Forbes Media. He joined Forbes in 2010. He was the first non-family member to run the company. And his mission was a daunting one. He had to transform an old media company into a new media company. And those of us who have been in journalism realize that's almost impossible. By every measure, he succeeded. This year, Forbes will be celebrating its 100th anniversary. And under the direction of Mike Perlis, it has evolved into a global media and branding company with technology at the center of its strategy. Forbes magazine has the highest readership of any business magazine in the United States, almost 7 million readers. There are 38 local international editions of Forbes around the world. And Forbes.com recently attracted a record number of monthly visitors, 56 million in the United States. Equally impressive, 60% of the advertising comes from digital, and 2,000 contributors regularly publish content on the site. Forbes has also diversified its revenue streams by licensing and leveraging the power of the Forbes brand in different sectors that include online education, real estate, and financial services. The secret for this success, Mike says, is, quote, people really feed their dreams and aspirations and fantasies through the success stories in Forbes. Mike often speaks to successful entrepreneurs and business leaders. Over the past century, Forbes Media's mission has remained constant: to champion entrepreneurial capitalism. Mike says that success and civility go hand in hand. Now let's rewind the tape for a moment to a young Mike Perlis, after graduating from Syracuse University in 1976. At the time, his philosophy was a little different. Now, as a former journalist, I want to quote. Mike Perlis said, "I'd watch all the commuters and thought, that's ridiculous." So he moved to Camden, Maine, and now his first job is my ideal job. He started the New England publications and produced magazines like Canoeing and Kayaking, and spent his days skiing, hiking, probably fly fishing for all we know. But then the love of magazines propelled him, I suppose, to New York City. In later years, he was the publisher of Runner's World, another great magazine, Men's Health, another great magazine, and CEO and chairman of IDG Peterborough. He was the first publisher of Playboy after Hugh Hefner, another instance where he came in to take over if the family reigns. Now, Playboy certainly could use him now, because if you're familiar with it, they got rid of the centerfold, then they brought back the centerfold, so there's a little uncertainty there. Mike was also publisher of GQ, CEO of Ziff Davis Publishing, whose magazines include Car and Driver, Popular Photography, and PC Magazine. Before joining Forbes, Mike was at SoftBank Capital, where he served as general partner for 10 years. He continues to be a special partner for the company, which funds digital media startups like Huffington Post. Mike has served on the board of BuzzFeed, and he was a board member and chairman of Associated Content. He's on the board of advisors of the Newhouse School of Public Communications at Syracuse and a trustee of Outward Bound International. Several months ago, a Syracuse journalism student was interning at our office, and I said, "Do you know Mike Perlis?" And she said, "Everybody at Syracuse knows Mike Perlis." Now, the best quote I've read about Mike is this, from one of his senior vice presidents. She says, "He exudes warmth. He's always smiling. The big takeaway is that he's just a nice person, a really good guy." Now, I hope he gave that woman a surprise raise for saying this, but that's certainly a definition of civility. Welcome, Mike Perlis.
Thank you, Joe. I'm now, I think I turned 64, but you lose track as you get a little bit older. But if I wasn't as advanced in age as I am, it would sound like I can't hold a job. But if you think about 40 years in business, it really, you know, each of those positions I actually didn't just come and go. But thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to talk for a little bit about civility. I'm going to leave lots of time to answer questions about many of the things perhaps that you're curious about based on what Joe so kindly said about my career. But I'm going to depart from that and talk about civility for the next little bit of time. It's we were talking about it. Alice, thank you so much also, and thanks for inviting me. What a pleasure to see the library from inside like this. And I asked about the topic of civility, and apparently it's been really exciting and motivating, and the subject matter has continued beyond its first time frame into the next year or so. And I actually can't imagine not having it as an umbrella subject right now. The ground is so fertile for conversation about civility. And in fact, I think there's a guy talking also somewhere else tonight about 9 o'clock, so we'll see where that all goes. But when I define civility, I really have, when I drop all the digital transformation, all the media-related stuff that I do every day, at the core of what we do when you're the CEO or a leader of a company, and from the very beginning of my career, is you create a culture that gives people the tools and the environment that they need to get the job done. And, you know, some people do that by fierce competition. Some people do it with fear. I never really had that in me. I'm embracing civility as I get older, but I've always felt that if you create an environment where people feel comfortable, where people feel good, where people feel positive about who they are and what they do, you'll create an environment that can succeed. So I've gone to some lengths over my career to make sure that the cultures I am responsible for place a high emphasis on that. And I define civility as respect for the dignity of all individuals. And we feel so strongly about that at Forbes that we actually have core values that everybody who joins the company receives when they join the company, that we talk about all the time. And at the very top is respect for the dignity of all individuals. And to me, that defines civility. If everybody you come in contact with, if it's a customer, a coworker, a competitor, if you're respectful of that person's dignity as an individual. I'm looking around at some friends from Riverside Yacht Club, for instance, and I think if every member of Riverside Yacht Club had respect for the dignity of individuals, it would be a calmer and quieter and even greater place. But we don't always think about things in those terms, and in the dog-eat-dog world of media, it becomes even more complicated. I have a sign, a quote, a little Post-it on my computer screen I spend way too much time looking at, that adds to respect for the dignity of all individuals. And it's Mark Twain's quote that it's never wrong to do the right thing. And if I screen everything through respect for the dignity of individuals, and think about it never being wrong to do the right thing, I figure we're creating an environment where people can get the right things done. We also have, let me read you some of the other core values that are important. Forbes is I think we're the biggest worldwide business magazine because we're purpose-driven, not because we're fiercer or more skillful, although I think we're very skillful, but we are purpose-driven. Our mission is to be the champions of free market capitalism, the champions of ethical free market capitalism, champions of entrepreneurs, how they succeed, what they succeed at, and what they do with that success when they achieve it. So being purpose-driven is really important to us, underscoring the word ethical. Another core value, we stay close to the market. Paul, you'd appreciate that. We watch our competitors. We listen to our customers. We listen to our coworkers. We try to be honest and transparent in everything that we do. It's on our list. And the environment at Forbes, and I hope it's obvious whenever people visit us or come and see us. I feel a little like I'm giving a sermon on Sunday, but I really believe that an honest and transparent environment is critical to the work that we do. We share good news and bad news quickly and very straightforwardly and without fear. The only fear we might have is if we're less than honest or transparent. The culture really rewards those virtues. We're nimble and we're decisive. We try to make decisions as quickly as we possibly can. That in the past may not have been the best way to make decisions. There are probably other environments where being more careful and more thoughtful is important. But in the digital world that we're living in today, we're placing an increasingly high value on being nimble and on being decisive. Deciding today what we might have in the past spent weeks or months thinking about. A 90% good result today. This sounds a little more like the real competitive environment of media, but a 90% valuable decision that we make today can very often be worth a lot more than a decision you're 100% sure about 60 days down the road because the opportunity has evaporated. We're about action, we're about learning, we're about growth. We try to instill in everybody that works for the company and everybody we come in contact with that we're always learning and that we're always looking for the most exciting and most important way to grow. And if I go back to my days in Camden, Maine, I had a very colorful investor, and he was really taken with this little company that we created. But he didn't really have to go to work every day, so he was always spouting off things that I should do and ways that I should do it, and he had given us the money to start the company. So, you know, I listened to many conversations, but one thing came back over and over again, and it was really poignant and really important to me, and it's the last value on our list here, and it's that Forbes is fun. This guy used to say to me, "It's really simple. All you have to do is have fun and make money." And he said, think about it as a circle. If you make money, you'll have fun. If you have fun, that's the best way to make money. And he used to just go round and round like this. And I think what he was trying to do, he'd come in and find this intense young guy who's look older all the time. And he was trying to figure out a way to kind of give me some philosophy to hang on to and something that would break the tension a little bit. So in those days, and now I'm going to talk in a moment about current events that I think are important. When I was younger, I used to aspire to being more reptilian, to being more, less the good guy, less the warm guy, less the always smiling guy. I thought if I could be more like some of my competitors, and I have a colleague that I'm thinking about all through my career who was sort of right there, a competitor sometimes, a colleague other times, and he was really known as being incredibly hard, incredibly tough. People were really scared of him. People called him reptilian, and I thought, wow, yeah, he really is. But maybe if I was a little more like him, I could be more successful. And as time has gone by, he's continued to succeed. It's worked out for him. But I've placed a higher and higher value on civility, on the long game of what it means to do the right thing. It's never wrong to do the right thing, and the value of having a culture that rewards that and that people feel comfortable in and feel motivated by. So at one time I thought, if we could mix the two of us, and I could be more of a reptile and he could be more of a good guy and treat people better, that'd be the perfect combination. I used to think, well, maybe 50-50. As I move along, I think civility is, in the long run, more important, and it certainly makes for more fun. Moving away from fun for a moment, it's tempting to feel that in the world that we live in, that maybe civility has run its course. That in my business in particular, I like to focus just for a couple of minutes on fake news. Fake news is really putting civility to the test. Deliberate fabrications that are disguised as real news and sometimes, often picked up by the mainstream media, really misleading and really confusing. I thought about this for this talk tonight, and fake news has been around for a long time. The earliest use of the term that I could find was William Jennings Bryan, who was always in the news, and he denounced the stories about him as an epidemic of fake news, and he had fake in big letters. In the 1800 presidential election, John Adams, this is before anybody called it fake news, was accused in the press, and people were quoted as suggesting that he was secretly planning an attack on France. Jefferson, who was running against, was said to be the son of a half-breed squaw, which both of these concepts were crazy and racist. And fake news has not really evolved too much from those two big categories of downside to the media business. And what's incredible right now is the incredible number of ways that fake news in our digital and social technology media obsession can find its way into the hearts and minds of millions of people. The New York Times reported famously this year on the story that was openly put forth as fake news that reported that tens of thousands of fraudulent ballots for Hillary Clinton were in a warehouse in Ohio, and there were pictures of a warehouseman, and there were boxes with pictures of ballots and on the sides of them, and he wrote this story about how there were all these ballots waiting and being pushed out and pulled in all over Ohio. And by the time the Ohio legislature looked into whether this was true, just a matter of a couple of days, this story had reached millions and millions of people and had made tens of millions of impressions in social media. So whatever believability there was, and as fraudulent as it was, it went out to the public. Some people heard the retraction, some people heard it categorized as fake news, but a lot of people believed it to be true. And at the same time, the media outlets that published this story were able to sell advertising based on the number of people who were looking at this news. So it becomes a very complicated situation for the media business. So how do we counteract it? And there are no really quick or easy ways to deal with it. But I do think that this is when we connect back to civility. As a public virtue, people showing respect for one another in business and making civility part of their guiding principles is really, really important. Did most of you watch the Academy Awards the other night? I was struck by before the big news of the night, I was struck by a number of the ads that ran. And not unlike the Super Bowl, a lot of companies, big brands, are embracing unification, are embracing impact and positive virtues as part of their message. And on the Academy Awards, I thought the Cadillac ad was just amazing, and it connected carrying one another and imagery of carrying one another and really loving pictures of people doing that, and then very subtly connected to Cadillac, carrying you from here to there. And the Super Bowl was the same way. Companies responding to this environment with virtuous ads about trying to be better, to be more civil towards one another. I heard the CEO of the Girl Scouts, Sylvia Acevedo, I think Dylan Schneider Group knows her very well, really carrying the flag for making the teaching of civics and ethics an essential part of our school curriculums, making it as important as science and engineering and the other tools that we're equipping our kids with to go out into the marketplace and succeed. The big business schools and the journalism schools and media schools like the Newhouse School now have, at least Newhouse does, and I think many of the others have ethics programs that are required people take before they graduate. And I think that's a move in the right direction as well. But nonetheless, with the proliferation of media, we've come a really long way from when, right now, in 3 minutes, it'll be 6:30. If we wanted to watch the news, we'd go home and we'd watch Walter Cronkite, or we'd choose to watch some younger guy on ABC or NBC. And in a one-way transmission, we would get all the news of the day. We'd watch the nightly news. And it wasn't a conversation. It wasn't many voices engaging in lots of distribution of content from different areas, but it was very unified and very orderly. And with all the proliferation of media and all the different voices out there, ultimately resulting in some cases in fake news, the media business has lost credibility. In 1976, sort of at the end of that era of news delivery, 76% of people surveyed by Gallup felt that the news media was credible and did a good job of reporting the news. Sadly, that number is 35% today, and sometimes I'm actually surprised to hear that it's that high, given what you hear in the street. So it's a historic challenge. My partner in the business at Forbes, a guy named Louis Dvorkin, and he's no longer goes by the title editor-in-chief, which may be symbolic of the shift in the way that media is created. He's the chief product officer, and that actually may be a problem. Maybe that's not as civil as it should be, but nonetheless, he's a dyed-in-the-wool journalist, and he says, focus on quality journalism, great reporting, great editing, and sound analytic argument, and you will succeed. So with all of the millions of people receiving our messages every day from thousands of different voices, we still try to pull all of that through a filter of traditional media values. Newspapers are struggling. In 1990, the newspaper business employed directly 60,000 people. The number's half of that today, a little more than 30,000. And it's not just reductions in force. There are fewer, with all of this new media that's out there, there are fewer and fewer newspapers at the same time. So I think there's an opportunity in all of this. We have to redouble our efforts to figure out ways to fight the emergence of fake news, counteract it with really good, solid reporting and fact-checking. There are a lot of positive signs, even in the newspaper industry. The Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, they're all actually experiencing upticks in circulation. Frankly, every time Donald Trump tweets about the New York Times, they're yes, because they're now on a pay model for NewYorkTimes.com, and circulation, based on what's happened in the political battlefield, has gone up dramatically, even for people who are used to receiving that news for free digitally. They did something very interesting this week. I don't know, also on the Academy Awards, they premiered their first consumer advertising campaign in 10 years. and it's all about truth. Truth, it's more important than ever. Truth is hard. Truth is hidden. The truth must be pursued. The truth is hard to hear, all the way down to the truth required truth requires taking a stand. Truth is more important now than ever. So inside the media industry, I'm hopeful that the challenges that we're facing are going to result in really positive activity from some of the biggest players in the space. And frankly, for me to be holding up the New York Times two-page spread, because they're a direct competitor, is indicative of how we've all got to try to make this all work. I really admire what they're doing. So taming fake news and the poisoned public opinion that it can create in our society and bridging the divides that creates is one of the major challenges, I think, not just for the industry, for our industry, and generally that's what I've talked about through my career. I think media is important to what we do as a nation, and media righting itself and staying connected in the right ways to audiences is more important than ever, and it's precarious right now. So, restoring civility and civic responsibility, it may not be the entire answer, but, I think all of this comes down to, back to what I was talking about at the beginning, respecting the dignity of every individual, doing the right things when presented with the opportunity to do the right thing, making our new tools that give us so much opportunity to get our messaging out to people, responsible to the same ethics and the same screens for quality that journalism has always, when it's doing its job the best, has always valued the most. So I think it's an amazing time. I'm 64 years old, like I said, and it keeps me excited and interested in this business, and I think it's going to be an age of civility. So on that note, thank you very much for listening, but I'd really like to answer any questions that you all have. Except about Playboy.
Mike, Paul Kramer, Associated Press. I'd like to ask you about whether you feel that journalism has become too political today, and when you have far left-leaning news channels and far right-leaning news channels, that do you think that is contributing to the fact that we no longer trust what we're hearing?
Yeah. Well, I think we've all done the experiment of watching a news story unfold on MSNBC in the morning and then switching to Fox News. And, sometimes actually lately it's been pretty united, which is shocking. But generally you've got, just like you do in Congress, you've got very partisan reporting. The left reports what the left reports, and the right reports what's the right reports with that particular slant. And I think it's been destructive. And I'm hopeful that maybe we hit bottom on that, and people are going to recognize that the viewer wants to. I think it's actually been, interestingly, looking at the ratings, it's been there's been a resurgence in interest of CNN because they're seen as being a little bit more down the middle. I think that unfortunately, the recent bickering back and forth on top of that comment about CNN between the president and CNN, it's, I don't know, after that, I think it was about 10 days ago when he had that 70-minute press conference, and he really, he went at CNN, and surprisingly, after that, if you listen to the reporting from CNN, they went back at him and lost their, in my opinion, lost their perspective on what their role is, which is to report the news, not to comment. And I think that's a pitfall, along with It's not all about fake news. A good journalist is going to report the story, not be the story, and there's been an awful lot of being the story lately. Thanks. Good luck at Associated Press.
Hi, I've got the microphone. I'm here, so I guess I'm asking the question. When you were introduced, I think the introducer said that there are 2,000 contributors to Forbes.com. And for me, beyond even fake news, it's that there's so much unoriginal material out there that's such a waste of time. And so my question is, how do you ensure, if you do, valuable information and reporting and ideas on your Forbes.com when you have 2,000 contributors? And by the way, my material has been on Forbes.com. That was some of the original stuff, just so you know.
So that's one of the, it's a really, really good question, and I'm glad you asked it. I was involved, as Joe also said, with the launch of Huffington Post. And when we launched Huffington Post, we also created a contributor platform. It was really called a blog platform, and we were fond of saying, if you've got something to say it in the Huffington Post. And we invited everyone to post on the Huffington Post. We kept the Sam Steins and the whole professional journalist group separate from that blogging community, but the Huffington Post was the Huffington Post, and anyone could blog, and anyone could comment on those blogs, attributable or unattributed. And it created a real maelstrom. It created enormous traffic. It created great name identity. It was a great business model, and I think it continues to be a great business model. But it suffers from many of the downsides that you described. When we launched Forbes.com, we had the benefit of having watched that blog platform experience and others. And we were very deliberate about choosing and vetting the contributors to Forbes very, very carefully. I'm sure if you posted, you were aware of that. You could just go post other places, but with Forbes, you had to get the keys, and you had to be trained on how to use the site. You had to qualify from an experience, a passion, an expertise perspective. And we felt very strongly that times had changed, come a long way from Walter Cronkite telling us how it is every night, that there are lots of opinions, that there's lots of expertise out there, and that we wanted to bring that big, diverse group of voices to the mix with Forbes.com, and that's what we set out to do. We also pay our contributors if they create enough excitement and enough energy to drive traffic against specific criteria that we give them. So everybody who contracts with Forbes.com has the ability to be paid. It's not, they're not doing it for free or just for reputation, though a lot of people enjoy it for those reasons. So I think there's a trade-off. Not every story is Pulitzer quality, but interestingly, they're all pretty good, or we don't let people continue to post. And the audience is really smart. And if the audience isn't responding, and we give them a lot of respect, and the audience really makes or breaks the contributors to the site, it's a fascinating undertaking, and often. More than just a couple times a year, a story that appears on Forbes.com from a contributor ends up on the cover of the magazine, ends up driving more traffic than anything any of our full-time veteran staff create. And I have to say that it's civil, but the competition that gets created between people who are paid to be our full-time reporters and journalists, it's raised the bar for them. At the end of the day, it's not who an editor decides has written the best story and puts it on the front page. It's very democratic. You put a story out there, it's exciting, it drives interest. You could be in your attic in Ashtabula and you could have more traffic and have more people reading your story than a 20-year veteran at Forbes. So it's complicated, but as I said at the end of my remarks, we try to pull all the new age tools and approaches to creating content through the screens of quality journalism.
My stuff was reported on, I didn't write it, so.
Oh, you didn't? What's the category?
Well, it was on creativity and the future. There was one last week on the.
Oh, okay. Maybe afterwards we could chat about it. I'd love to look through it. Sounds interesting.
Hey, Mike.
Hey, Gary.
I'm interested in your tipping point when you decided not to be reptilian and to be the Mike Perlis we know and love. Was there any one moment, or what was the evolution?
Funny, I actually took great, I'm being very, it's late, I guess I'm being very open, Dr. Conway. But I remember once hearing somebody describe me to somebody, I got back to me third hand, Mike Perlis, he's just a professional good guy. And I thought to myself, well, no, I'm very talented. I'm very skilled in my head. I'm really skillful. I have a lot of professional experience. And then I caught myself and I said, wow, if that's the worst thing somebody can say about me, that's not so bad. And I think I don't know, we wouldn't call it a tipping point, but I actually thought to myself, you know what, if you get through X decades of being in business and you take affront at the weakness of being a good guy, and maybe it's not so bad. So I think going to work every day is hard. We all do it. And we're not all lucky enough to work in places that place a value on comradeship and collegiality. And, there's too much evil in the workplace if not attended to. If you don't make evil unacceptable, then the coffee clashes and the gossip groups and the interior critics and feelings that people have of competitiveness internally, it can really make going to work miserable. And we've all been there and we've all seen it in too many places. So I'm luckily in a position where a big part of my job is to keep that at bay, and it's much more fun than being a reptilian catching little insects. I'll send them to anybody who wants them. I think they're on the site, actually, too. Yeah.
Mike, you publish around the world. You travel around the world. You're just back from Davos. Two questions. What do people outside of the United States think of what's happening here and of our president? And secondly, how do people around the world think about the idea of civility?
It's interesting. It's to the last point. I think that it's subtle, but I do a lot of business in China now. We have a majority stakeholder in Forbes who's based in Hong Kong, and I'm actually reading a really interesting book now called "The Beautiful Country and the Middle Kingdom." And beautiful country being what the Chinese refer to us as the beautiful country. And as near as I can figure, they refer to us as that because we're the greatest consumers of things that they create in the world. And the Middle Kingdom, of course, is East Asia. And what is the striking proposition of this book is that it's about the history of the relationship between the United States and China. And that relationship is like 300 years old because the United States has only been around that long. China has been around 4,000 to 5,000 years. And their sense of civility and their sense of who's new and who's old and who gets it and who doesn't is built around that belief that we're kind of young and new at this, and maybe we think we know all about civility, but maybe we're discovering something that they've known for thousands of years and treat differently. So I think that most of the world thinks of us, my impression, as being in a big hurry, not taking time off, not enjoying, August at the beach, with everybody else. So I think there's a lot we can learn from other cultures where we don't always have the moral high ground. And then, as relates to the president, I think that there is a lot of, I must say, there's a lot of respect for our system and our country. When I was at Davos, I expected everybody to be talking about Donald Trump. And what I really got was the sense that our system's pretty solid, that I was in Europe when he was inaugurated, and I was in Europe when the marches took place, the next day. And I think people were really impressed with both of those things, that Donald Trump could be elected and that millions and millions of people could, in a very civil way, with no real outstanding issues, could protest that. And I think they admired that. But at the same time, they were quick to suggest that Brexit is a much, in Europe, Brexit is a much bigger problem. They really didn't want to hear about our 4-year deal with Donald Trump. They're concerned about Brexit being forever. So we're not always the center of the universe, as much as Donald Trump would like us to be, perhaps. I think that they're all hopeful, everyone's hopeful, that whether they agree with him or like him or, however they see him, hopeful that he succeeds because their economies are so linked to ours. Yes.
Mike, first of all, thanks for being here. I work down the street at NBC Sports, and we're trying to diversify and rely less on TV revenue and more on digital revenue. And what struck me about the introduction was that you guys are now at 60% digital revenue.
80.
At 80%. Wow.
80 plus. Advertising revenue, 80% of it comes from digital.
I'm shocked. I'm surprised to hear that, and I'm just curious where you see the media industry going and how that ratio might change over the next, say, 3 or 5 years.
I don't see it going. I don't see it regressing back. I think that for us, we're in a very. I'm glad you asked the question because I haven't really talked much about. I'll answer that question, but move to something else. The diversification issue. We publish Forbes magazine successfully, and it makes money, but it's not a high-growth business like our digital business is. And I think of Forbes magazine as a really beautiful, really important front door to our business. And it's got flower boxes, and it's painted red, and it's got a big brass knocker. It's beautiful, but it's a small piece of the much bigger building that's the business. And right now, the biggest piece of that business is our digital advertising and, to some degree, digital subscription revenue business. But the real opportunity that the magazine and that front door give us is the ability to launch products, diversified products that are not media-based businesses. We're actively involved in launching financial services businesses, real estate. We have a couple of Forbes towers that we've experimented with in Asia, where instead of a building being named, there's a guy in Manila who built a Forbes media tower in Makati, right outside of Manila. And his name is Josue Antonio. And if you asked him, well, why did you pay Forbes a license fee and then a percentage of revenues to put their name on your building, something that would never happen here in the United States, he'd answer you and say that I could have called it Joey's Media Center, or I could call it the Forbes Media Center. And just as it does to you, I'm sure it makes sense to him to do that. So financial services, education, real estate, some travel-related businesses are all where I think the growth is going to come based on the equity and the brand value of the Forbes name. So it diversified us away from the ups and downs of the advertising marketplace.
Hey, Mike, on a bigger question, with all this focus and the use of media in interrelations with each other, I worry that the younger generation doesn't get enough of a chance to even practice civility. So when the opportunity arises, there's a problem in our future for civility, I would think.
I flew back from somewhere last week, and I watched Mr. Robot on TV. Has anybody seen that show? And there's a brilliant character who is just the smartest guy you could possibly imagine around the skills of, tracking things down digitally, finding information, finding news and data about people and companies. But he's absolutely handicapped, as in much the way, he's an exaggeration of what you just described. No one can put his hand on his shoulder, no one can, really have a conversation with him. So I think that, again, I sound like it's the Sunday morning, but I think humanity will figure out a way to deal with it. But I do think, it's a real exaggeration of what every generation has felt about the next media. I mean, my father used to say, you can't, turn off that boob tube, He was afraid that we were spending so much time watching television that we wouldn't know how to behave in the real world. And this is that on steroids, I think. So we'll see.
How do you ensure you've got these values written down, but how do you ensure they're really acted out within the organization?
Well, we have 400 people in New York, and then as Joe pointed out, we have businesses in 38 countries, much smaller staffs there. It's just lather, rinse, repeat. You just keep driving it home, and you make it habitual. You reward it. You don't reward behavior, and it's not there's no values police. It doesn't. That would be against our values, but it builds momentum. And I had this great opportunity 6 years ago when I came in as the first non-family member to run the business, and it gave me the opportunity to. And it wasn't that it was a terrible place. It was a pretty wonderful place, and has been around for 100 years. But that change allowed me to do things a little bit differently. And we just started then and started doing it. And, these are all values that aren't very controversial. No one, it's not a hardship for anybody to embrace them. So I'm really pleased that people have. And I think people feel it when they come in the building. So not sure. It's a soft hand. It's an invisible hand of, sort of group support. Yes.
There's been criticism of women's fashion magazines exploiting young women with eating disorders and, who are starving themselves so they look a certain way in a magazine. I just had a couple of observations about men's health, which I guess you're no longer involved with, but in much the same way, I feel that the magazine portrays these men with six-packs and big biceps, and I worry that a lot of young boys and men, will see these pictures and they'll start taking protein supplements, then they'll take creatinine, then maybe they'll think about steroids or HCG, and middle-aged men on testosterone. So is there a responsibility of magazines not to sort of exploit this sort of unattainable physique that men are supposed to have?
It's such an interesting question posed that way about men and men's health. You hear it so often about women in the fashion magazines and things. And the story, the quip that I'll give you will only support your fear. But it's me being honest. What I remember I helped launch Men's Health. We launched it together with Women's Health and a magazine called Quick Healthy Cooking. And it was a Rodale Press magazine. And it was a newsstand magazine when it began, 100% newsstand distribution. It was the least expensive, most direct way to launch that magazine. And I can't believe I'm going to say this because it's really bad. But because it persists, I think it's only gotten worse. When we were at Rodale, this was one thing. Now it's a whole different, level. But we used to look at the covers and say that implicitly, through the image and the cut lines, the sale was put an inch on your arms, take an inch off your waist, and go all night. That's what the sort of the filter was when the magazine began. So it was a guy, as it is every single issue of that magazine, is a guy with showing a bigger arm or the one you want or should have. And, one of these, I think they're just done with CGI, because I've never seen it in the mirror, that's for sure. And then they, like the women's magazines, although the men's magazines are really tame by comparison, the sexual prowess element of it. I mean, if you ever really crack Cosmopolitan, or men blanch when they see what was in there. But I think Maria Rodale, who runs Rodale Press now, probably has a really astute answer to that question. I do think that magazines and media have a responsibility to not portray unhealthy imagery. When I began with Forbes, we were criticized for only having, middle-aged, portly, very successful white businessmen on the cover of Forbes. And we now have had lots of women, lots of people of color. We've got a big youth movement with our 30 under 30 business, and somebody kidded with me the other day that we really ought to have a portly, successful white businessman on the cover every once in a while. So we do it not because it's politically correct, but because we think that the audience is really tuned to that, and that to stay with one image, one direction wouldn't be good business for us. But I think the answer is yes. How that happens in the commercial world of selling magazines and products, it's different for every company.
Sorry. Do you think that the administration's, I guess, for lack of a better term, war on the media will have lasting impact, or
But, I'm sorry, what was this?
will have a lasting negative impact, or will
war on the media.
Yeah.
I think we're in uncharted territory. We've never been here before, so I don't know what the lasting effect will be. But I do think that, there have been really seismic changes in media along the way. The other thing that's happening in media, and particularly in entertainment media, is this whole onslaught of binge-watching television series. When we're not watching the war on media or the political dialogue, we're on episode 8 of the latest, series, and this content is so good, really, or so addictive anyways, and it's coming from so many different places. I think that along with the war on media politically, the glut of content from a business standpoint is going to have real impact as well. Okay.
We'd like to be civil.
Hi, Mike. I didn't realize until the introduction that you're on the board of BuzzFeed, and I wondered when it came out with a couple of questionable reports, what kind of position that put you in as a board member?
I actually, Joe correctly read, I was on the board of BuzzFeed. Before I joined Forbes, I was on the board of Huffington Post. Then actually BuzzFeed was founded by the technology, the CTO of the Huffington Post. So our investment firm, invested in both Huffington Post and in BuzzFeed. And I think once I joined Forbes, I was on the board for 18 months or something, and it became clear to me that I was going to be in a position like that pretty quickly, because they made the transition from, dog and cat videos, which are still the bread and butter BuzzFeed, but they hired Ben Smith, who's a really talented and capable, Washington-based newsman, and they tried to build and have successfully built some credibility in the news side of things. So I think, luckily, I don't have to answer that question, because I think they do some things really well at BuzzFeed. The business is really the business of their original, video-based, let's have fun. Jonah Peretti, who's the founder, had a really rascal-like approach to the business, and they built a big business, and the political piece is much smaller. But I can answer that question easily, that it would have been embarrassing, but it's not, or it would have been challenging. I think they've actually done some really good things, but given my position at Forbes, I think some of the things would have been challenging as a board member.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Rich Edlin of Greenberg Traurig, Civility in Law. Now that's one you don't want to miss.